All right, you guys. So I'm going to be talking about topic 5.6 and 5.7 in this lecture. So 5.6, agricultural production regions. During understanding here, the availability of resources and cultural practices influence agricultural practices and land use patterns. All right, so the learning objective here is just to explain how economic forces influence agricultural practices. So in other words, depending on where you live is going to determine, whether or not you practice commercial or subsistence farming. And one way that can help us, or one theory that can help us explain this, the Bitteren theory. But anyways, essential knowledge here: agricultural production regions are defined by the extent to which they reflect subsistence or commerce practices. Okay, so let's delineate the two here: subsistence and commercial agriculture. So subsistence agriculture, right? That's an agricultural practice that provides crops or livestock to feed one's family, close community. With subsistence agriculture, we're looking at farmers that use few mechanical resources. There's going to be more people who are going to work, right? Take care of the crops and the livestock. The land size isn't going to be as large. We're looking at like 1 to 5 acres. So with subsistence agriculture, we're not necessarily looking at profit trying to be made. That's not the main goal of subsistence agriculture. Really, again, it's just to feed one's family, community, and maybe earn just a little, but not necessarily to make huge profits like businesses. That's more with commercial agriculture. Those who practice that. So this is a agricultural practice that requires focus, or an agricultural practice, that focuses on producing crops and raising animals for the market for others to purchase. All right. So usually, with commercial agriculture, we're looking at land sizes that are 400 acres plus. They're going to produce large quantities of crops, right? They're going to use more inputs, whether that's machinery, whether that's fertilizers, pesticides, so on and so on. Okay. So, if you kind of want to, picture, right, subsistence versus commercial, right, just think of your, heavy machinery, right, trying to, produce crops like this. And then, subsistence agriculture, obviously, right, you might think of, families helping out there. So, looking at this map here, and we looked at it in class, right, the share of the labor force employed in agriculture, right? We can see, those in less developed countries, much of Africa here, some parts of Asia. A lot of people are working in agriculture. So that tells us that, they're probably, providing for themselves, trying to make some money off of it, but not huge amounts of profit, right? It's going to tell us that subsistence agriculture is going to be in less developed countries. On the other hand, commercial agriculture will be in more developed countries because, as we'll look at, commercial agriculture or commercial farms are mainly, and commercial agriculture is practiced mainly by agribusinesses. All right, so huge corporations that have kind of, eaten up, no pun intended there, small farms, and kind of, have created these huge enterprises, right? And they're going to employ less labor, so to work in the farm. So that's why you'll find commercial agriculture in more developed countries there. All right, another map that'll help us kind of explain where commercial agriculture is located is just by the use of tractors per 100 square. This map here looking at tractors per 100 square kilometers of arable land, so land that can be farmed, right? And we can see easily, right? Europe, United States, right? They're all, compared to this map here. I know it's not the same, data, but we can clearly see, right? More developed countries are going to be shaded in, right, as compared to the less developed countries, especially those in Africa. All right. Here in this map, we see, the number of farms, right, and how those have kind of, decreased over time, and especially in the last 60 years, when the Green Revolution started. So we see farms have kind of dropped off here. We see, farm sizes increased. We see, land and farms kind of stayed the same. But what this graph here is trying to tell us, is the fact that, we're able to produce more with less people and less labor. Okay. So, anyways, that being said, to kind of get the learning objective and the enduring understanding, right, of this topic, we've also got to look back at intensive and extensive farming practices, and how that kind of shapes subsistence, or how one can look at subsistence in commercial agriculture. So, intensive and extensive farming practices are determined in part by land costs, and we can look at that through the bid rent theory. So, intensive agriculture, that's agriculture that involves, as you guys know, right, greater inputs of capital and paid labor relative to the space being used. So, intensive agriculture is going to be, near urban areas. Sometimes in urban areas, but really near them. Extensive agriculture, this is agriculture that uses fewer inputs of capital and paid labor relative to the amount of space being used. So, usually, extensive agriculture is going to, use large plots of land, and is going to be located farther away from urban centers. Okay. And just if you need some reminding here, intensive agriculture, here's some examples, right? Paddy rice farming in South and Southeast and East Asia, right? Very labor intensive. Market gardening, right? Here in the States, California, Texas, Florida, right? And then, veggies and fruit farms, right? Okay. I believe I showed you guys this table in one of the lectures a couple of weeks ago. But here we can see, intensive commercial farming, intensive subsistence culture, extensive commercial farming, and extensive subsistence, right? Agriculture. But, if you're trying to delineate the two, especially when you're looking at an image, right, you always have to ask yourself, right, how much land is being used, the intent of food production, labor, whether or not, machinery or human labor is, shown, right, what seems to be used more, right? So it's good to kind of know these four, right, aside from them individually. It's kind of a lot to think about, right? But intensive subsistence agriculture, that's, essentially, people working the land intensively, putting forth a large amount of human labor, right, to generate high crop yields and small plots of land to support their family and local community, right? So with intensive subsistence, right, farmers here are trying to feed more than half the people living in, densely populated areas, kind of in those less developed countries, right? Peripheral countries, if you want to use that word, right? But, it could be a big gamble sometimes, right? Because yields that are impacted by weather, disease, or pests, that can have a huge impact. And as populations increase in intensive subsistence agricultural regions, many farmers maximize food production by modifying their local environment. So, we could look at, wet rice agriculture as a good example of that, right? They might make large investments in productive seed types and fertilizers, right, and human labor rather than, mechanized equipment, partly because, maybe they can't afford it, or maybe it isn't in their best interest to. Intensive commercial is going to incorporate, chemical fertilizers and machines. They can be close to markets, but they can also be far from the markets. And characteristics of intensive commercial agriculture can be seen in certain practices, right? Specifically, monoculture, monocropping practices here. So, people who participate in intensive commercial agriculture, especially in the United States, are going to focus on monocropping. And that's, basically the cultivation of one or two crops that are rotated seasonally, things like corn, soybeans, wheat, cotton. These are crops that are usually what the market demands, okay? And they can be very profitable. So again, monocropping, growing one crop in a farm system at a given time. So for example, here, Farmer Jones grows one crop per season, but changes per year or season. right? And monocropping allows for specialization, simplifies cultivation, and maximizes efficiency. At least that's the goal. Because you don't need a variety of equipment or other inputs to grow other crops. Growers choose a crop that is especially conducive to the environment available, and that also increases efficiency. Monocropping usually leads to high yields and increased sales, but there's a downside to this practice. It can strip nutrients from their soil, but then again, that's why farmers rotate. But even though it has increased yields, and one could look at this as in a good or a bad way, it has also decreased crop prices. Unfortunately, this can force many farmers to go out of business, and many encourage, because of that, many encourage successful operators to purchase the land, right, of failing farms. Okay, or this may encourage, my bad, not many encourage. And to compete with this, farmers, who have small lands, they might invest heavily in high yield seed fertilizers and pesticides to maintain the soil. But then again, those seeds might come from major agribusinesses. So it can kind of be a bad cycle here. Falling under this umbrella is monoculture, right? Growing one crop and farm system year after year. Okay. And in the United States, again, it's going to be like corn, soybeans. We're talking about livestock, it'll be like hogs or cattle. Okay. And then multi-cropping here, right? Growing several crops in a farm system. We don't need to really get into that though. Okay. So going back to the essential knowledge here, right? We can kind of, tell where, right, intensive and extensive farming practices are going to be practiced, right? And we can look at it through the land cost, but we can also look at it through the bid rent theory. And here is a good example, right, of the graph here of the bid rent theory. It's basically the price of land in relation to an urban area, right? So the farther away you are, right, from the market, or in this case, the central business district, the CBD, right? The further away you are, the further the price is going to be lower, right? Land, that is, right? The price of land. The closer you are to the CBD, the higher the cost or rent of the land. Okay, and with the bid rent theory here, this explains the relationships between land values, commercial location, and transportation. All right. These slopes that you see here is based on the practice of land users, bidding against one another for the land, right? The most desirable land and the most accessible at that receives the highest bids. Okay. The demand for central locations is translated into high land values, like I said, right? But again, one more time, the bid rent theory is just explaining how land value determines how farmer will use the land, right? In this case, for us, as we're here in Unit 5, right? The bid rent theory is going to explain how, whether or not land is going to be used either intensively or extensively. So in this case, the farther away you are from the CBD or the market, right? You're going to most likely practice extensive agriculture, right? Because you're going to need, a greater amount of land, right? And if you're thinking about, transportation costs, right? With extensive agriculture, you're most likely going to be growing, say, grains, cereal crops, right? Those can be easily stored, and those can be transported easily, so you don't need to pay as much, right? Intensive agriculture is going to be closer to the central business district, generally speaking. So, right, because you won't need as much land, right? Because you'll have more inputs, you can yield more, a little bit more. But generally speaking, in general, right, the majority of agricultural practices, which I misspelled there, will occur farther away from the CBD, simply because land will be cheaper. Okay. So again, here's a little bit more of the bid rent theory. Various land users are prepared and able to pay for access to the central market. The further from the CBD, the lower the cost of the site, right? Intensive and extensive farming practices are imparted by land cost, all right? I'll be looking more at this when we look at the von Thunen model. Okay, so here's another way of looking at the bid rent theory. You'll see that there are different colors here. Don't worry about that yet. Okay, but again, if we're kind of looking here at the key or the legend, right? The blue slope here is going to be on tomatoes, right? With the kind of violetish, right, slope is going to be here, forests. So, I mean, the basic idea here is that, tomato growers, the ideal location that they'll want to be in, right? And ideally where they'll want to grow these crops is going to be kind of here in this area, right? I mean, if we looked at the, if we filled out the whole slope, right? I mean, we could see blue here, right? Same thing with forest. We could see it here, but, given this theory, right, and we don't need to get into the details of it and how, it came up with it and why the slopes are the way they are. Don't worry about that. But again, I mean, forest, that violet color could be here, this blue light color could be here. But again, like I was saying, right, the bid rent theory is based on the practice of land users bidding against each other, right? So, whatever slope is higher than the other, in this case, tomatoes versus forests, right? They're going to be able to get this land, right? Forests here is going to outbid tomatoes, right? Because we see this slope here is kind of above this one here, the blue one, right? And like I was saying, right, those who practice extensive agriculture, right, like livestock here, it's going to be farther away. Okay. So here's another way of looking at it, this time with numbers, right? You see the economic rent here, and then you see the distance from the city in miles. Okay. Again, here's another way of looking at it with the von Thunen model down here. Don't worry about it quite yet. The von Thunen model, we'll look at that. Whoops. All right. So 5.7, spatial organization of agriculture. Learning objective here is just explaining how economic forces influence agricultural practices, right? Same as 5.6. Okay. So let's start here, right? There's, since the Green Revolution, right, with all the technologies that have been developed, right, and all those the hybrid GMO crops, right, technological advances. Because of all that, we've seen a rise in agribusiness and corporate farming. Okay, one second here. Make sure I have the notes for this one, you guys. Okay. So as I was saying, right, because of, since the Green Revolution with the rise of technology, right, with modern equipment, improved fertilizers, pesticides, new types of seeds, right, creating higher yields, this has all led to the rise of agribusiness, right? And agribusiness, right, is going to be, practicing commercial agriculture. They're going to be highly mechanized, right? And much of the raising of crops and animals is going to involve, those chemicals and that biotechnology, again, that was, developed during the Green Revolution. Okay, so because of agribusiness, we've seen large-scale commercial agricultural operations replace small family farms. Okay, we're thinking of, corporations and businesses like Monsanto, Purdue, and whatnot. All right. So we've been seeing, the rise of those organizations compared to, independent farmers succeeding, right, and being able to continue to practice, right, say subsistence agriculture. Okay, and with agribusiness, this is going to involve the production, processing, and distribution of agricultural products and equipment. And I see two A's there. My bad. Okay. So just to give you an idea of kind of still, the impact here of the Green Revolution in agribusiness over time, right? Farmers today, right, they're producing 262% more food with 3% fewer inputs than farmers in 1950. Okay, and again, part of that kind of has to do with, those hybrid grains, fruits, and vegetables. Okay, because again, right, these modified foods can Some of them can grow in extreme temperatures or in wet or dry conditions. Okay. So, you know, agribusiness, right, compared to the homeowner scale, I should say, my bad, of growing crops here, right? A homeowner might, raise vegetables in a backyard garden. Agribusiness, though, they're going to be owning a farm of thousands of acres, right? That are worked by large staffs of employees, right? How they're going to process food, right? Home in the homeowner scale, right? They're going to, um, you know, by eating fresh, homegrown vegetables for dinner, preserving vegetables for future use. Agribusinesses, right? They're going to can and freeze products in factories, so on and so on. So you can see the difference here, right? So however you picture agribusiness, right, from farm to like a Fred Meyer, for example, right? However you're thinking about it, the way you picture it, right? More than likely, right, you're kind of picturing the right thing, right? If you really think about it, just by looking at this. Anyways, more on agribusinesses here. 84 and to give you a sense of the impact here of agribusinesses, right? 84% of farms worldwide are smaller than 5 acres. And these farms operate about 12% of the farmland. 16% of farms worldwide are larger than 5 acres and represent 88% of the world's farmland. Okay. So in other words, it seems like 16% of farms, right, are representing much of the farmland in the world, right? And that said, there are less farms today than in 1930, right? And they're larger. Okay, and the rise of agribusinesses here is kind of also meant rising costs for small land farmers. All right, and part of it has to do with farmers struggling to remain in agriculture, right? Because these agribusinesses are simply producing more and selling more, right? And they're able to sell cheaper. Okay. On that note as well, many small land farmers are also aging, so they're not necessarily able to kind of pass on what they've learned. Okay. So because again, fewer people are interested in taking on the challenges that come with farming. And why would people do that? I mean, an honest question. I mean, agribusinesses, right? They're advanced machinery and advanced techniques, right? And the more capital that they have, the more inputs they're able to put. I mean, it's just a matter of using a tractor, right? Collecting whatever it is you need to collect, right? Okay. That being said, the rise of agribusinesses has led to the establishment of a complex network that connects places of production with distribution to consumers. And this is known as the commodity chain, right? These complex, right, commodity chains link production and consumption of agricultural products. So commodity chains, basically activities involved in the creation of a product, right, the design, right, the production of raw material, manufacturing, assembly, and distribution of goods, right? It begins with inputs such as land, seeds, fertilizers, and animals, all tended to by farms to produce a crop. Right after cultivation and harvest, the crop is processed, packaged, and then transported to wholesalers and retailers. Eventually, the end result is a finished commodity that is marketed to consumers. There's more to this than meets the eye. Businesses sign labor contracts and create marketing plans. Governments negotiate trade agreements, right? Sometimes, two countries might establish, policies and relationships to ensure successful deliveries. So it's all kind of as it states here, right? A complex chain, right? So here's one way to look at it, right? Local cinnamon growers, right, or groups, or collectives, right, goes towards facilities, right? It might go to export companies into domestic markets or international markets, or it could be this, right? Starts off at a farm. Well, food corporations, first of all, first buy the land, right? They might buy a farm local farm consolidated with the rest of their farms, right? And they grow the crop or the livestock, right? It goes to processing factory, right? Then it goes to a production factory and then to a retail store, right? Like a Walmart or some Fred Meyer, right? Or a Winco, right? And with that might come, research and development of, processing or producing, right, food, right? Or might come the marketing scheme, right? How are they going to sell it? And of course, there's transportation with all this. And we can see some of the biggest corporations in the world kind of have this, this complex network. So I mean, you look at all of the what's all around here, and it's not like it. Food today comes from one farm all the way to our market, right? It's a mix of ingredients these days, which is why you have processing and production factories, right? Not Nestle, for example, my bad. Nutella, for example, right? The ingredients come from all places, right? The cocoa from sub-Saharan Africa, right? The hazelnuts, the sugar, right? All from different places, right? Even oranges, right, are part of this complex commodity chain now these days, right? Citrus industry operates on long-term contracts, right, and depends on the future of the market, right? But orange growers manage, harvest, sell, right? Some growers are small farms that sell their fruit to a fruit handler or a cooperative, right? Other growers are part of a large fruit processing company, right? Fruit processors take the fruit, right, and with that they either package juice or the concentrate. Processors that produce. The processors then produce the packaged juice and then market and sell it. Bulk processors that produce frozen concentrated orange juice work on distributing it and market it to stores and consumers at the end of the commodity chain. So there's a lot here, even with oranges. Okay. You see this commodity chain for corn here, right? Using inputs like seeds, fertilizers, water, right? Growing it, harvesting it, processing it, marketing. Okay. So that being said, right? Even though that is a complex chain, right? Pricing today, or let me take a step back, right? The dramatic growth here in the production of crops, right, due to technology, right, that's all led to higher supply of whatever it is we want today, right? And because of that, it's led to low prices, right? It's like, again, one positive there of the green revolution, the technology there. And at times of high production success, prices can drop so low that production costs are higher than the value of the product. And this can be good for agribusinesses, because they can afford that, right? They'll be able to sell more. But it can be catastrophic for farmers, small scale farmers. If you couple that with a loss of crops due to weather events, farmers can go bankrupt and lose their farms. So that's kind of led to farm subsidies over time. It kind of started in the 1930s during the Great Depression. It's basically, low-cost loans, insurance, and payments by the U.S. federal government to farmers, right? It's supposed to protect farmers in theory, but today, it hasn't really been the case. Small family operations, the ones that need the help more than the large farms aren't necessarily seeing the money. Instead, the highest quantity producers of commodities like corn, soybeans, wheat, etc., are benefiting the most. So farm subsidies, that's a debate on its own. We don't really need to get into that. But anyways, that being said, the basic law of economics here for the opposite, right? There's a low supply of a crop, for example, and that crop does not produce high yields, right? The cost is going to increase. Okay, so there's a low supply of crop, right, or it doesn't produce high yields, right? High cost, in other words. All right. So yeah. Ultimately, technology has increased, the economies of scales in the agricultural sector and the carrying capacity of the land. So in other words, right, Economies of scale. I should say economies of scale, right, is basically, you know, this economic idea, right, that cost advantages gained by cost advantages are gained by an increased level of production, right? In other words, the more of something you produce, the cheaper, each unit is to produce, right? So it's cheaper per unit to own a big business than a small one. So, technology has kind of helped out in that sense, agribusinesses. But it's also, like I said, right, increase the carrying capacity of the land. So, I mean, we can grow more basically in smaller land. Okay, so here's kind of a summary of what what I've kind of talked about here. So you can take a look there. Anyways, um, two relatively short topics here. So yeah, okay. All right, the next few topics will have more information, so we'll go from there.